I feel pumped. You know why? Because I didn't know before my introduction. Hold on. Here we go. Before my introduction, that I was part of such a historic moment. And who doesn't need who doesn't benefit from a pep talk from Randy Neighbors, right? Before you speak. It is such a privilege to be here with you all. I'm going to be really honest. I was actually out of town when Mike Kramer emailed me and said, hey, would you do this? And I was like, is that a joke? I am completely unqualified to do this. So, and then I walk in this room and there's so many people that have had such, I would imagine, a greater and longer walk with the Lord than I have. So I am really, really honored to be here with you all. And I want to be honest, when I thought about what I wanted to share, I really felt like God was asking me to be courageous and share pretty vulnerably about some of my own discipleship journey and what that has looked like throughout my own career and my leadership journey. And I'm a little bit, you're not supposed to tell people this, I don't think, but I'm a little bit even hesitant to do that because I'm like, no, I don't really want to go there, right? How many of us want to go there? But I am so encouraged by even the women that have come before me today and have shared so vulnerably. So thank you for setting the stage for us to be able to do that and for me to be able to share. I want to start with a story. I want to tell you all about something I'll never forget. And that is, I will never forget how it felt to be sitting on my therapist's couch, his dark brown leather couch that kind of squeaked when you sat on it, and to sit before him at the age of 23 and just tell him how incredibly hopeless and broken I felt. I sat down with him and told him that I was really wrestling with what the point of life was. I felt like I was doing all of the right things, yet I did not have much joy in my life at all. I felt, I'm a doer, you're going to find that out as I talk today, but I was working so hard and running so hard on my religious treadmill, so to speak, and really coming up empty. And I was a little bit angry, I'll be honest, and thought, where is the abundant life, the joy, the delight, the fruits of the Spirit that I've been promised? Instead, I felt like I was living very reactionary, and what was coming out of my heart, which was rather ugly, was the opposite of the fruits of the Spirit, right? I had been married for almost a year, and some really negative things were coming out for me internally at home with my husband. I was critical. I was blaming him for my unhappiness. I was terribly defensive. And all of that was leaking out in my leadership journey too. I had just taken the position of executive director at Choices. Many of you all know that organization in Chattanooga, and I was leading a staff of 10 and probably out of my depth, but really emotionally unhealthy. But here's what's important for you all to know about this situation with my therapist. If you had looked at my life, you would have thought, she is killing it. She is awesome, right? She is serving all the time. She's doing all the things at night. She's so involved in her church. Her and her husband just are the cutest little thing. You know, we were kind of on the fast track to church leadership. I had this great and promising career, and a lot of people rallying around me to say, you can do this, you can really be part of some historic and shifts at the organization I was at. But I, for the first time probably in my life, was pretty scared for my own mental health because I knew what was going on internally. And I'll never forget sitting with my therapist and saying, Steve, these are all the ugly behaviors I don't like that I'm doing. Tell me what the to-do list is to stop this, and I'll be good. And if you could just tell me in this session, that would be great, so I can just spend $100 and that's it. And I'll go on my merry way. And he just kind of laughed at me, and he had met me when I was 18, so we had a little bit of a history, but he just kind of chuckled and said, I think you might need to schedule some subsequent sessions. And I think that we probably need to talk about your family of origin. I think we probably need to talk about your wounds. And I did not like that answer, but that really jump-started me on this journey of being introduced to incredible freedom and incredible restoration. I might even dare to say that that moment and all the things that have followed for the last 9 years were really kind of the start of my discipleship journey. I have really come to believe wholeheartedly and been introduced to this idea that I have up here on the slide, that it is not possible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. I found Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzaro. I will never forget sitting on my porch swing, reading that book, just crying, thinking, I'm not a crazy person. Somebody gets it. It was like oxygen to my soul to begin to understand what was happening in my heart as I kind of started to pop the hood and look at some of my emotions. I have been saved since I was 7. I'm a pastor's kid. I come from a long line of ministry on both sides. And yet I had never allowed my heart to be transformed, my heart, right? Not just my head, to be transformed by God. And I think it's also important for you to know, and Randy mentioned this, and this is part of my passion, is I was in church. I went to youth group. I went to a Christian college. I went to a Christian school, right? But I was 23 and I would say very emotionally unhealthy. For me, it kind of felt like, and Pete talks about this in his book, almost like this iceberg, right? This is what everybody was seeing, and nobody had any idea that all of this was underneath. Not to mention, I didn't even realize that I had not offered to Jesus all of this 90% that was underneath the surface, right? This quote up here says, the degree to which we give Jesus access deep beneath the surface of our lives is the degree we will experience the freedom of living out of our true self in Him. I can get on a little soapbox about this, and I'm going to kind of tell myself to calm down, but I will say I don't think I'm an isolated case study here, okay? I think all we have to do is think for 2 seconds about the people that we know. I think all we have to do is think about all the Christian leaders who's all of a sudden we're just finding out about things they're involved in and their lives are imploding. I think we're very good at doing the work, doing church, doing missions, saving people, volunteering, yet we have an unhealthy inner life. What does that mean? We're not caring well for ourselves. We don't spend time with God. We don't see actually union with God as part of the transformative process. We have unhealthy marriages. Right? We're totally missing out on the way that God uses marriage to bring us into the likeness of His Son. We don't love other people well. We're unhealthy in our leadership. That was me. I'm not going to say I've arrived by any means, but I wasn't a healthy leader at that point. We don't have a healthy culture at home in the way we're parenting, the way we're raising our kids. I loved how you talked about earlier how important that is, right? That is part of kingdom work and part of success. Pete Scazzaro in his book says, we often neglect to reflect on what is going on inside of us and around us, which is how he defines emotional health, and are too busy to slow down to be with God, which is how he defines contemplative spirituality. I found this graphic because for me, going through this journey has really made me have to think about how I define success. What does it mean to do kingdom work? And I'm not going to I don't want to blame anyone or any of that, so I'll just keep it very general. But I think most of our Christian discipleship is caught up in this traditional graphic, right? Meet Jesus, attend church, here's the checklist, we want you to connect, we want you to serve, we want you to give, and then we're going to reach kingdom impact, right? And I think how I have had to redefine success for myself is that actually our hearts and lives being transformed, our whole bodies, minds, souls, spirits being transformed actually increases our impact. But I would argue and take this graphic a little bit further and say that deep change is actually part of the impact. It is the success, right? Being transformed into the likeness of Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not a pastor, haven't been to seminary, but when I think about missions, and I have been involved in the nonprofit world for over 10 years, I think about it as three different parts of a stool, right? We have evangelism. That, to me, is what I was taught is number one. I think that's what people are most familiar with. I think even when I think about evangelism, I think about it as mostly global missions, right? Missions overseas, the people who have never heard the name of Jesus. I think mercy ministry is what we see a lot locally, right? I think about mercy ministry as, how does my neighborhood look different? How does my city look different because there are people here who serve a God who is passionate about renewal, about restoration, about doing for the least of these? And then thirdly, I think about discipleship of believers. But I want to give a caveat to this, because when I think about discipleship believers, I'm thinking about the me's of the world. I'm not just thinking about somebody who just got saved and we say, oh, we better get this baby Christian into some discipleship studies. And that's important, right? But what about the Ashley Baldwins of the world that were in church, right? Were in Christian school and not experiencing true discipleship? And I think what I'm trying to say today is that the growth that is happening as we disciple believers is part of the work. And I would challenge you to ask yourself, do I really believe that? Or do I believe that there is a hierarchy of ministry? There is a hierarchy of kingdom impact. I work for Mission Increase, like Randy shared, and one of the verses we constantly come back to in our teachings is Ephesians 4:11-13, and I want to read it for you. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, the teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. In my job, I am primarily coaching and teaching nonprofit leaders in biblical generosity and fundraising, right? So what I'm talking with leaders, we have about 90 organizations in Chattanooga that are working with me, in particular, faith-based organizations. I'm helping them understand that they actually have a role in discipleship with their givers, right? So I'm teaching them that the work of ministry is not just the work that you're doing at the food bank. The work of ministry is actually inviting and growing the people that God has called to the work and discipling them on their journeys of generosity. And what I'm saying today is I want to take this a step further and say, it's almost like if I had another three-pronged stool just to talk about this, I would say the work of the nonprofit or the missions organization is one. The discipleship of the givers in that partnership is another one. But the growth of the people actually doing the work. These women who have talked today about how God is growing them as they serve is what I'm talking about. I was at a staff gathering a few weeks ago, and one of my colleagues shared, and one of the things that he said, which I just keep rehearsing it and reciting it in my head, is God doesn't need people to grow his ministry. He uses ministry to grow his people. That's us. That's the people that get to be involved in ministry. I'm constantly sharing with my nonprofit leaders about the funding side, right? These nonprofits, God's got it. He can provide for us, right? He doesn't write these large checks or find avenues to do that because he wants to grow the givers he has brought to these causes. And I think it's the same thing about people that are actually in ministry. I think the impact is the transformation that can happen through the participation in the kingdom work. And I think one of the things I would ask you all to think about today is, do you actually believe this? Because in my life, I am really good at saying the right things. And I found that out. I was a really good student. Okay, I know the doctrine. I can recite what I'm supposed to recite. But functionally, what is my life saying? I believe, and I think that's a question we have to ask here today. I don't know why this clicker is so difficult for me. I like to think about an emotionally healthy disciple, and I did steal this from Pete's book on emotionally healthy discipleship. An emotionally healthy disciple slows down to be with Jesus, goes beneath the surface of their life to be transformed deeply by Jesus, and offers their life as a gift to others for Jesus. I am so convinced, and this is where I have to tell myself to curb my enthusiasm, but because of my own experience, I'm more convinced than ever that Jesus desperately wants to heal, restore, and transform our souls. He doesn't just want a bunch of robotic worker bees. That's not who the person of Jesus Christ is. That's not what he modeled through the Gospels. All through the Gospels, he engaged with people first emotionally, and he showed by his own life, he modeled contemplative spirituality. He took time to be with the Father. He took time to go and be alone. I don't think there's anything Jesus did that he wasn't strategic about. If that wasn't a strategic priority for him that was meeting some type of outcome, he wouldn't have stolen away to pray, right? What does that tell us? The man only had 3 years of ministry, right? You better believe he was really strategic about what he did. When he met the woman at the well, he didn't just tell her how to fix her life. He didn't fix her life for her. He asked her about what her heart desires. He didn't talk about the surface. He already knew the husbands that she had, right? But he asked her about living water. He said, do you want this? I actually have something I can offer you. That is an emotional connection. He wants to heal her soul. We just had a sermon at our church, actually, about the lame man who sat by the pool. And our pastor pointed out, which was terribly challenging for me in the moment, with some healing that I've kind of been stuck in asking the Lord to do. When Jesus met that man, who I can't remember, the Bible people in the room have to correct me, it was either 28 or 38 years that he had been by that pool. 38. Thank you, Joan. She's on top of her game. 38 years. You're trying to tell me that that man, it was really overcrowded for 38 years? Probably not. And what does Jesus say? He says, do you want to be well? That's a question targeting that man's heart. What was going on in his emotions that was actually keeping him from being well? Today, I want to look at how Jesus defines success, okay? I know that this is only one passage of many, but for me, this is really a North Star for my life. This passage that says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Look at this graphic. This graphic really clearly illustrates how this verse can play out, right? We have loving God well, loving others well, and loving ourselves well, all in tandem. And at the crux is emotional health and contemplative spirituality. Pete Scazzaro says the combination of emotional health, which is what is going on inside of us, and contemplative spirituality, slowing down to be with God, addresses what I believe to be the missing piece in much of contemporary Christianity. When practiced together, they unleash the Holy Spirit inside of us in order that we might know experientially the power of an authentic life in Christ. Think back to that stool for a second. Discipleship of believers, mercy ministry, evangelism. I'm really going to spend the rest of our time today focusing on discipleship of believers, okay? That's a big passion of mine, which you'll learn through the rest of our time together, and I think it's often one that we easily neglect. So this is how I am putting myself out there and putting myself on the spot. I thought to myself, should I just sit up here and talk to you about what the symptoms of emotionally unhealthy spirituality are and how some of those might be changed or redeemed in someone's life? I don't know how effective that's going to be. I felt like God was like, I think you should just tell them how that has worked for you in your life. So this is going to be an Ashley Baldwin sort of case study, and we're going to go through together loving yourself, loving others, and loving God well. And I'm going to share with you how some of this work impacted my own life. At your seats, you have a list of the top 10 symptoms of emotionally unhealthy spirituality. I would encourage you to take that home and use it as sort of a checklist and just say, what of this resonates with me and what of this doesn't? But I kind of want to put the spotlight on myself and talk about loving yourself. So one of the symptoms for me that came out in my emotional unhealth was denying the past impact on the present. An example, I rarely consider how my family of origin and significant people/events from my past have shaped my present. Covering over brokenness, weakness, and failure. I have a hard time speaking freely about my weaknesses, failures, and mistakes. Living without limits. Definitely not loving yourself. Those close to me would say I often try to do it all or bite off more than I can chew. And then finally, in number 2, ignoring the emotions of anger, sadness, and fear. I'm rarely honest with myself and others about the feelings, hurts, and pains beneath the surface. All of these, still to some extent, right, we're never perfectly healed, have been present in my life. Back to that story when I sat there in that counseling office, I was highly critical of myself, which is why that's what came out towards everybody else, right? I had really never allowed God's healing to invade my own past. I came from a highly dysfunctional home. You wouldn't know that on the outside, again, right? We really looked like we were just killing this ministry thing, right? But it was a disaster inside, okay? A disaster. And what I started on that journey with Steve at Elbow Tree Counseling was not just subsequent sessions. It was a 3-year process of going through internal family systems counseling, which 100% changed my life. And a huge part of this type of therapy is this idea, kind of at the crux, that we all have these wounds from the past that we are bringing into adulthood. We're actually living out of these wounds because the same maybe coping mechanisms that we had as a child, right, which is the best that we could do. It's almost like those parts have not caught up with the reality that we're adults now, right? We have agency, we have choices. Nobody can hurt us. And what Steve took me through was this process of validating those wounds, unpacking those memories, helping me figure out what false beliefs I had as a result of those circumstances and situations, and then how I could move out and into more freedom as it relates to some of those unhealthy coping mechanisms. And for me, and the way that Steve did this with me, which I'm forever indebted to that man, he was able to help me introduce those wounds, those false beliefs to the person of Jesus Christ and find true healing. It was some of the most painful work I have ever had to do. So while I wholeheartedly endorse it, I say, buckle up, because it's going to be hard. But at the same time, I wouldn't be the person that I am without that. I will actually never forget, I was on vacation in Hilton Head with my husband. This was early on in doing this work, and I don't know, maybe I'm a crazy person and this only happens to me, but I was doing like this run walk on the beach, where during the running, I would be just like fuming and angry. And then during the walking, I would just be sobbing and crying out to God and saying, how could you do this? How could you allow these things to happen? I mean, it's like I had this list, right? Because this was part of my work, this list of all of this ugliness and these terrible situations. And I'm not going to pretend like there wasn't curse words that were shared in my anger and in my screaming. And I will never forget stopping to sit on this big piece of bark that was on the beach and just feeling God say to me, 1, I wasn't making this happen in your life, and 2, I was actually right next to you, crying as you cried when these things happened to you. And these were things that were distancing me from the Lord, right? And I didn't even know that. And not to mention that, but to also say even more than that, that he was telling me, I was with you in these. I saw you in these, right? And if these things hadn't have happened, if those had not been part of my story, I would have never had the privilege and the gift that I see it now to actually discover who Jesus really is and continues to be at a young age. I want to share just a few ways that this whole this idea of loving yourself well has changed for me, right? Here's some characteristics that we want to move towards. Naming, recognizing, and managing our own feelings. Breaking free from self-destructive patterns. Being aware of how our past impacts our present. Developing the capacity to express our thoughts and feelings clearly. Being able to ask for what we need and identify those needs. Assessing our limits. This was a big one for me. Grieving well. Finding the true essence of who we are in God. developing a balanced rhythm of life that enables us to be aware of all of the sacred. These are the things I hope to continue to even move towards in greater and greater depths. I want to move on to loving others. I want to tell you, why do I throw myself under the bus? I do not know. I want to tell you all the ways I wasn't loving others well, to be honest, okay? Number 10 on your list, judging the spiritual journeys of others. I often find myself occupied and bothered by the faults of those around me. Oh my goodness, I thought I was just the Bible queen. And my whole job, anytime someone shared anything with me, and to be fair, I thought being a good Christian meant I was supposed to sit down and tell them every part of what they just shared with me that didn't align with Scripture. Number 1, using God to run from God. I fill my life with Christian activities to avoid addressing difficult issues in my life. Number 3, dying to the wrong things. I deny healthy God-given desires and pleasures of life such as friendships, joy, music, beauty, laughter, nature. I find it difficult to die to self-protectiveness, defensiveness, lack of vulnerability, and judgmentalism. And then lastly, spiritualizing away conflict, smoothing over disagreements, bearing tensions, avoiding conflict. I was fixated on fixing other people, probably because I was fixated on fixing myself, and it was easier to think about fixing other people than have to look inward and see what was happening inside my heart. Symptoms 1 and 3, using God to run from God, filling my life, dying to the wrong things, really prevented me from loving others well, because I didn't have to show up for real in relationships. But to be fair, I didn't know how to show up for real, which is the discipleship component I'm talking about today. This is not how Jesus led, y'all, not at all. I had a very insular life. I was only engaged with church people. That was my whole life, my whole community, the only friends that I had. And I was only around people who believed exactly what I believed. I was defensive and lacked the ability to be vulnerable in real time. And let me give you an example of that. We were in a church small group. This is kind of how our sharing went. And I'm not going to get on this soapbox because it just bothers me so much. But I did it, but now it just bothers me like crazy. We sat in small group, and I thought I was so cool and so vulnerable because I'm telling them, we got in this fight, this thing's happening, blah, 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 blah. That was 3 weeks ago, and we worked through it, and we're great. What does that actually mean? That means I spent 3 weeks outside of community without any type of real support, figuring out everything on my own, just back and forth, right? My husband and I, just the two of us. Let me tell you one avenue that really helped in my discipleship journey. That was joining a 12-step recovery group. Golly, I'm not sure how many years I was in that. It might have been 5. But I was there to just face some of my codependent behavior in my marriage, with my friendships, with church. And there's 2 things that being in a 12-step group taught me that I am forever grateful for. The first is that I was introduced for the first time in my life to unconditional love. That's a little bit sad for me to say, but that's how I felt, okay? So like how we perceive things, that was my reality. People didn't want to fix me. They didn't just tell me the things I was doing wrong. The way a 12-step group works, there's no advice giving. There's no crosstalk. You show up and you share. And guess what? And this is what shocked me. I would lay it all out there, and you're going through like yucky stuff when you work those 12 steps. And what blew my mind is I would share something, and then at the end, someone would, after the group, give me a hug and say, I love you. That's it. I'm still on Team Ashley. And for me, I felt like what I was sharing would actually prevent people from being able to still be on Team Ashley, right? But no, they were still on Team Ashley. And I'm here to tell you, I know teaching and instruction and accountability is important, but I'm just going to speak from my own experience. That right there is what actually allowed me to face myself internally. Okay, that was the catalyst for change in my life, being seen and loved exactly where I was, because it allowed me to be able to face myself. Secondly, it taught me how to be in relationships in real time. My sponsor at the time told me I had to call 3 people a day and check in with them about my heart and how I was doing, and I just wanted to throw up. I was like, are you kidding me? But it taught me how to pick up the phone, send a text message, and say, I'm driving to work and I'm in this shame spiral. Or let me call you and say, I just don't feel like I'm good enough today. Or, hey, I just got in this really big fight with my husband, and here's what happened. And it taught me how to A, check in with myself in real time, and B, be in community with people in real time. I still am on a text thread with people. It's probably been 8 years now, and I don't know how I would still be standing without them, right? I can tell them anything at any time of the day, and they show up for me like no other. And what that helped me to see is that we so minimize the impact that all of us have to actually mirror God's love to other people. Because what were all of those people doing to me? Every time I picked up the phone, they were reminding me. Maybe they didn't say it sometimes. You're okay. You're not alone, and God loves you. I believe so strongly that we are just here to be vessels and conduits of God's love to other people. And how do we do that well when the channel's constantly clogged? Do you know what being with relationships in real time did for me? It helps me unclog the channel in a matter of seconds instead of being in my head about something for 2 weeks, right? And losing a lot of impact, kingdom impact in the moment. This was and still is true of the community in my life. And what happened for me as a result of this is I just wanted to do this for other people. I'll never forget my husband and I, we do kind of these, he probably hates me for this, but our anniversary's in January, and we always get away for a night, and he just wants to connect, and I'm like, let's talk about our mission statement. Let's make a strategic plan for the next year, and let's do a SWOT analysis, and but he was, being kind and doing some of that with me one Christmas, actually, and we realized we are doing stuff all the time. We didn't even have kids at this point. We were out of the house like every night, serving, doing all the things, and that wasn't bad, but we actually weren't doing what we felt called to do, which was just to invest in the people around us. And so I'll never forget, we quit everything we were a part of. We took everything off the calendar. We said, hey, for this year or this 6 months, we're not doing this. And we said, what we are going to do is make 2 crock pots of spaghetti every Thursday night and invite anyone who wants to come over. We invited people. We started having people live with us, which was hard but great all at the same time. And for about 5 or 6 years, actually I think March will be 6 years, we started on Thursday nights and then changed it into Friday nights. Every single week, my husband and I made those 2 crock pots of spaghetti. We got so good at it that we could do it in 15 minutes. We could set up the crock pots for the night before. I was proud of that. But we just said anyone can come. I started a Facebook group. I had 300 people on that group. Everyone we met. People from Facebook Marketplace. My husband met sports team from Howard at the gas station by our house, and he said, hey, you guys should come over. And they all came, this whole sports team, We had tons of different people, donors I was working with, leaders that I was working with, clients at the time when I was at Choices that I was working with, people in our neighborhood. I mean, it didn't matter. You were invited. And what was so powerful for my husband and I about that is we just started so strongly to believe that all Jesus is offering, and not all, because it's a huge gift, he just wants to feast with us. He says, come on to the dinner table and be with me. And what do? And it's me, I do this. I say, I just can't do that, God. I'm not wearing the right clothes. I don't have my hair done. I don't have my makeup done. Whatever those things are, and I know it's not hair and makeup, we create these barriers to just sitting with God. And so we said, that's what we're doing in our house. It doesn't matter. Come on, and don't bring anything. Don't ever bring anything. Because we wanted to literally imitate what Jesus was doing. That time changed my life. I thought it was going to be the avenue that I would get to hang out with my friends more, and my friends didn't even come, okay? It was a little disappointing in the start. The people that came were the most incredible people that, if I am honest, changed my life because you know my background, you know how I was raised. Some of the people that showed up to my house weekly were the people that I was taught not to hang out with and to dislike. They were the people that were quote unquote living in sin. And I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying they were kind of like the people on the list, right? They were not my good Christian friends. My home was filled with queer people that were having dinner together. My home was filled with people who lived on government assistance, right? In the projects. People were in my home that were women in church leadership, right? At a variety of different churches around my house. I was with a mentor earlier this week, and he said it's kind of hard to hate people when you're in relationship with them, right? And that time changed my life. It taught me how to love people. It gave my husband and I think, the passions that we still have to this day. Kingdom work was happening in that house. Modern day miracles. I could tell you story after story. And I had one donor who, he would drive all the way across town. I live in St. Elmo, to go pick up disabled people that were his relatives at Hosanna House and bring them. I mean, it was kind of a circus sometimes, you know, and I believe even in my own faith, modern day miracles were happening. I could talk for 3 hours about this, so I won't, but one time in particular, I mean, my husband and I just looked at each other and we're like, we made 2 crock pots, which is honestly not that much. And the people, when this whole team of boys came through, or we had these 4 boys that were in foster care, that someone we had met was taking care of, I doled out so many plates of spaghetti. And I am not even lying. I wish I had kept track of it, because I know that an actual miracle happened in that room. I am such a huge fan of Bob Goff, and he says this quote that I resonate with so much. I used to think I was supposed to fix people. Now I just want to be with them. What are some characteristics that I and we should want to move towards as it relates to loving other people? Identifying with and having active compassion. Initiating and maintaining close and meaningful relationships. Respecting and loving others without having to change them. Learning the capacity to resolve conflict maturely. Loving others out of a life of love for God, and living in committed community that passionately loves Jesus above all else. Lastly, I want to talk about loving God. Some of the symptoms. Number 6, doing for God instead of being with God. I tend to evaluate my spirituality based on how much I'm doing for God. Dividing life into secular and sacred compartments. I easily compartmentalize God to Christian activities while forgetting about Him when I'm working, shopping, studying, recreating. Can you say quiet time? Right? That's how I was raised. Ignoring the emotions of anger, sadness, and fear. I had such a faulty view of God. I was actually sharing this with Randy before. Sonship was a big tool in my life. And I'll never forget sitting on my hammock outside my house one day, doing some of that work and just crying and realizing I would have never said this verbally. I would have said, oh yes, the cross, God's done it all, blah, blah, blah. But functionally in my head, I was like, if I can only get 80% this week, thank God he's going to kick in the remaining 20. That's not the gospel, right? But that's where I was. I thought being a disciple of Jesus was doing for God. I had to flex the muscle of communing with God and engaging in contemplative practices. And for someone who is a doer, that was so uncomfortable for me to slow down, to ask hard questions. One of my favorite things to ask of God, and I was doing that before this talk when I was getting nervous, is I like to sit down with God. I like to visualize like him and I are almost having coffee together, and I'm closing my eyes and asking him, what do you actually think of me? And I would ask you all, have you ever asked God that? What do you actually think of me? I think for me, doing some of this work has shown me God doesn't even just love me, he likes me. Which again, we might say, but I was definitely not functionally believing. These contemplative practices really helped me to get rooted and grounded in God's love. And it was from this place of being rooted in God's love that I was really able to tackle this whole idea of surrender. Because how do you surrender to someone that you don't trust, that you don't know really loves you, that you don't know really likes you? The 12 steps taught me a lot about how to commune with God and to surrender at every point in my life. Again, I would have told you, oh yeah, I'm surrendered. Oh yeah, God's will in my life. But what does that actually mean when we get down to it? That was part of all of these things coming together and picking up the phone and saying, I'm having a really hard time surrendering X, Y, and Z. Can we pray the third step prayer together about surrender? I really came to understand that the invitation from God is about partnership and adventure, not duty and obligation. And to that, I can wholeheartedly say, let's go. What's next, right? Here are some of the targets that we and I want to move towards as it relates to loving God. I already shared this, surrendering to God's love in any and every situation, positioning ourselves to hear God and remember his presence in all we do, communing with God, practicing silence, solitude, a life of unceasing prayer, resting. We could have a whole talk on resting, right? But most importantly, understanding our earthly life as a journey of transformation towards an ever-increasing union with God. Remember when I first shared about that 23-year-old in Steve McIlvain's office? I haven't arrived. I believe none of us do, right? This is a transformative journey for the long haul. But I'm no longer working really hard to manufacture the fruits of the Spirit. I watched this change in my life, and it feels a little awkward to say this because I'm not saying it to elevate myself at all. But all of a sudden, I was like, wow, I feel kindness towards this person. I want to be generous. I don't feel like we're in competition. I don't feel reactive. I don't feel defensive. Opportunity after opportunity after opportunity started coming in our lives. We were and still are just having fun. We don't even have to wonder what we're supposed to do. It's like God just illuminates the next thing, and my husband and I are off to the races, right? Joy and delight is present in my life, which sounds a little silly to say, but I'm here to tell you it was not present in my life. I feel alive. And as it relates to discipleship, which I'll share in a moment, this channel of God's love that we've been talking about is so much less clogged for me. There's a lot of energy that's been freed up. It was amazing because people kept telling me and my husband, wow, I just can't keep up with you. And I'm like, this isn't even hard, right? I'm not saying life isn't hard, but energy, right? We're alive. We are engaging in God's work all the time from an overflow, not from a deficit. Now for me, I don't feel compelled to do everything. I don't have guilt that I used to have. I don't sign up for every activity. I know where my target is. I know what I care about. I view myself as a missionary to missionaries. Okay? I am so convinced of this passage, John 10:10, that Jesus wants us all to be alive and woken up and living out of an overflow, that it's such a gift for me that I get to do that on a daily basis. Professionally, personally as well, I'd consider all of that integrated. But that I get to help ministry leaders come alive. I get to help givers come alive who say to me, I'm working with a family right now, I'm doing this out of obligation. I don't feel joyful. That's a heart discipleship thing, okay? That's not a functional, I'm not giving to the right places, right? My calling is discipleship of believers because I'm confident of the abundant life that he offers all of us, and it has really changed my life so much. I want to end with just a few thoughts about how this could possibly connect to missions, okay? We are at a missions conference, for crying out loud, right? I want to go back up to the macro level for 1 second, and I want to ask us, do we have a unified view of what missions is? If we don't have, we got to all be on the same page about what success is. What is the work of missions? And that's hard work to define, but I commend you all for engaging in that conversation. Secondly, transformed disciples serve out of an overflow, not deficit. I am constantly hearing from pastors, I just can't get people to do anything. Oh, well, why don't we ask why instead of just asking people to do more, right? Okay. That was true for me. I heard this sermon one time from the Moody Radio Pastors Conference. My husband and I listened to this 3 times in a row, driving up to Michigan for a vacation one time. And this pastor shared to a group of pastors, which I was like jumping up and down. He said, if you have people walking out of church thinking they have a longer to-do list, you've got it all wrong. They should be walking out of church hearing the proclamation, it is finished, and going out into their daily life, right? Throughout the week. And so I would ask us all, do we believe that discipleship of believers, and I feel like I have to clarify for 1 second, I am talking about the me's of the world, okay? I'm talking about the people in your pews. I'm not talking about people who got saved yesterday, okay? That discipleship is important too. But do we believe that the discipleship of believers is part of the work? There's not a hierarchy, right? And do we believe that channels of God's love are actually much more effective when they are unclogged, right? And then thirdly, respect for your calling during kingdom work. Because when we have an abundance mindset, it's okay that X, Y, and Z person has a passion for evangelism and global missions. I am clapping for you because God has given me a different part of the stool as my calling. Right? I need people to care about evangelism, about mercy ministry, because I really care about discipleship. And is it okay that we are all called as part of the body to different areas? To make it a little bit more personal, and I'm going to close with this slide. To taking it down to the micro level, right? Moving from missions at a macro level to a micro level. And this is much harder to look at, okay? I want to ask you these questions, and I want to encourage you to think about them. What parts of your life need to experience greater healing? If you popped the hood on your life and on your heart, so to speak, what would you find underneath that nobody might know about? What behaviors, what patterns are still existing? What of these behaviors and patterns have yet to be transformed by Jesus? My personal favorite, what do you believe God actually thinks about you? And then I would challenge you with an action step. Can you carve out 10 minutes this weekend or this week and maybe do some journaling or just sit in silence if you're able to do that and talk to God about these questions? I'm going to close with my favorite quote in the whole entire world. The glory of God is a heart fully alive. This is God's invitation to us as believers. This is what he wants for us. He wants his people to be mobilized and to do that from a heart that is alive. I'm going to guess I'm probably over, so perhaps somebody can help me. I don't know if we have time for questions. Who has some burning questions? Thank you all for listening. I know that was probably a lot getting thrown at you. Mm-hmm.
Are we able to give slides if I can write everything?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah. And not that I'm directing the women's ministry here, but I will put a shameless plug in and say, Peter and his wife, Jerry, they wrote a great book about the emotionally healthy woman. They have a book about emotionally healthy discipleship, emotionally healthy church, really getting into the nitty-gritty of these different concepts. All of them? Yeah. Yes, in the back. That it's what? A commandment.
For the people that say, I'll use my teacher voice. For the people that say that it's too hard, it's not my gift, what would you say to them to encourage them to let us know? It is a commandment. We are commanded to do it.
How do I want to answer this question? The question is, if we believe discipleship is a commandment, what would you say to people and encourage them if they would say discipleship is just too hard? I can only speak from my own life. I would reflect back to you that I hear a lot of duty and obligation just in that question. And so that's something I would want to kind of pop the hood on and look at a little bit further. But I would also say, what are the cons and the risks of not doing this? Because for me, the risk was I was 23 years old and not sure what the point of life was. And so if discipleship is too hard, I think about myself and I think, well, do I want to enjoy my life? Do I want to be free of self-destructive patterns? Do I want healing, right? Like, do I want delight and joy? Do I want real relationships, right? Those are some of the things I would be thinking about. And for me, I don't know how to live any other way now. It's so ingrained into my heart and soul. It's hard for me to even say, oh, this is like discipleship, right? I don't know how to not. I can't do this alone. Randy, don't ask.
Just getting clarification on the question.
Yeah.
And I think the question is, making disciples is hard. And so try to connect that with your own discipleship and how hard it is to make disciples.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. No, I'm like, can I be done now? No, I'm just kidding. I think about the people that didn't give up on me. I think about the people that walked those difficult roads with me and are still walking those difficult roads. I think ultimately, thinking about our view of success when it comes to discipleship is so important, because otherwise we will 100% be discouraged if the people we're discipling don't have the outcomes for their lives that we want them to have, right? Or honestly, that are biblical. I'm not saying that's unbiblical, right? But we have to instead think about, what is it that we're called here to do? And does that ever end? Does walking with people on their journeys of faith ever end, no matter how they respond, what decisions that they make? And I honestly always think of it more as like a garden metaphor. And I know it's maybe cliche, and I'm not trying to release some of the hardship of it, but we just never know how a seed that we plant will be impacted and impact somebody's life. And we may never see that fruit, which is hard. I don't know if that's part of the question, what happens when you don't see the fruit, right? You're saying time out. Randy says time out. Thank you all so much for having me, for being with me. It was a joy and a gift.